Yes, I did. Fun, and that's the point. Blender is a tool to be enjoyed. Yeah. So that's this is a lot of what I've been doing in the last year. I'll get into a little bit about me in a second here. But no, I didn't mean to close the whole thing. All right, we're gonna do that. We won't make slideshow. I mean, it was great, but okay. Thank you. So I put this up to be like a thanks slide, but I really like the way it made it look like that was just the end of the presentation. I all enjoyed it. I just wanted to say it's been great having you.
I'm off to make an animation.
Yeah, there you go. You've learned enough. Just wanted to leave that there because it amused me. Actual thank you slide. I just wanted to say thanks up front. So I've been working with a lot of people throughout MAGFest. I'm a MAGFest staff member. I've been working with the office staff, the core sort of group of MAGFest, who've just been amazing and supportive. And if MAGFest is great, it's because these people are great. They support everybody they work with really, really well. In my particular capacity, I've been part of the theme team. So every year, we know him. One of my fellow members of the department. I got some actually. Okay, so theme team. Every year, MAGFest has a sort of grand theme, and it's based on a video game. We sort of take that and run with it. The idea is to sort of customize the year and everything about it to fit the sort of visual aesthetic and the sort of energy of whatever the game is. This year it was Metroid Prime. I'm a big fan of Metroid, and just to throw all the way back, my first year at MAGFest was 2016, which was the previous Super Metroid game. I totally geeked out about it. Metroid's one of my favorite things, so this year has been just crazy exciting for me. I've also been part of the Swag team. If you don't have a Swag this year, please go buy Swags. They're amazing. If you don't know what a Swag is, I'll talk about it a little bit. I'm also part of the VRChat department, so we do a theme every year where we have an interactive space that's sort of a themed version of this venue, but in virtual, theme world where everything is sort of themed like a game. So the word theme a lot, I'm realizing. Also got the chance to be part of MAGTV and Mediatron this year, so there are 3D assets that are woven through a lot of things, and the point of saying all of this is that Blender has been the tool for all of it. So I'm trying to sort of just set up some context for what Blender does in a MAGFest capacity. Also, I've gotten the chance to work with Fangamer. They do the merch design for MAGFest. They're awesome. I have bought many, many things from Fangamer, but they actually get to sort of work with some of those folks. It's been crazy and great. So this is the next slide. I just really like just leaving it on the screen and looking like just kind of an existential crisis. And I don't know, man. So I wanted to pause there. Okay, so me, I'm MAGLord. I really should use social media, and I really don't. But Discord and VRChat are where I'm at. That's me drinking coffee at probably an unreasonable hour, and also having a Nintendo seal of quality on my phone. Just that's who I am. Like I said, MAGFest team VRChat department head. In real life, I work for Northeastern University as an assistant director of design. And other cool projects. We GM together another entirely virtual video game music festival, virtual comp, basically. I'm a design lead and co-VR lead for that. We also have our little group of VRChat developers that we call Virtual Harbor that started out at MAGFest. And we have our own themed version of Pose, real-life Pose, called Pose Nightclub, belonging to Poe. We have a cat named Poe, so one should always make a nightclub, a virtual nightclub for one's cat. Okay, so getting into it. What is Blender? Obviously, Blender. It can be very confusing to talk about Blender with people that don't know a lot about 3D modeling. People have confused it for everything from talking about Blenders to, is that a dating app? And it just endurance for me. For real, what is Blender? So Blender is hard to describe briefly. I would say it is a truly catch-all 3D development tool. There's no one thing that it does. There are some things that it does better than others, but importantly, it is free. Not just free, it is open source, which sort of tells you about the ethics that guide its development track as well. You sort of can trust the trajectory of open source in different ways than you can trust a sort of commercial product. It runs on anything. I don't know if anyone here has a Steam Deck, but the very first thing I did when I bought my Steam Deck was like, oh cool, I'm going to go install Blender on it. Works great. Don't push the sculpting too hard, because it's not what it's for, but like it's awesome. Portable Blender. Animation, rendering, sculpting, all of these things, totally great. I use that as my first tool of choice for all of those. There are certainly other tools. Some people have strong preferences, but another thing that's great, Blender is having its 30th anniversary right now, which like is another thing that sort of, you can sort of look at that as a metric of trust in what the tool is, I think. And it has truly only been getting better and better as it goes, and in different, even better ways more recently, like in the last 5 to 10 years. I've been using Blender for longer than I'm willing to admit anymore as I talk about Blender, but a long time. How do you get Blender? You just truly go download it. It really is that simple. Which operating system? All of them. It is Windows, Mac, Linux. And no complicated thing about versions or whatever. Just get the latest one and it's awesome. But if you truly want some bleeding edge thing that like a cool YouTuber is showing you is only on the alpha version of whatever, it has those too. You can go get like fancy and get the latest tools, which there always are actually. So why Blender? So there are a lot of tools available for these sorts of things. It sounds like this room is a crowd of people mostly that are interested in getting into 3D development, and obviously there are a lot of different tools out there. So it's almost a cynical take, but it is a practical one. The first and best reason for a lot of people is just simply it is free. And you know, I love Blender for a million reasons, and that is not the strongest reason that I love it even, but that is, you know, for a lot of people, myself included, one of the biggest possible factors. So basically, low stakes. If you're interested in 3D modeling and you have any computer, that old one in your closet works fine, I promise. Just throw caution to the wind, go get Blender, try it. There's a famous YouTube tutorial, you make a donut with Blender Guru. I would say you are 2 hours from having your own 3D donut and feeling like, you know what, I'm a 3D modeler now and look how cool my donut is. Like, very, very, very low stakes. I truly encourage anyone to just take that like Saturday afternoon where you don't know what to do and just go install it and find a YouTube series like that. To put this in context, why free matters even more, this is Maya. I don't know that Maya is the only competitor to Blender, of course, but it is one of the ones that is most frequently compared against. This is what Maya costs, just for context. 1 year is, I did this presentation last year, and I actually had a slide that I was like stealing from, and noticed that the price had gone up $100 in the 1 year between these two things. So to put that in context, you can get 3 years for a scan, $5,600. So yeah, I'm not saying Maya is not worth that money, truly. Maya can do incredible things, and there are things Maya can do that Blender can't do, or at least does differently. So this is not to say Maya is bad, this is to say I don't think in my life I could afford it. Another thing that happened when I was trying to update this slideshow was going in and seeing that they have a new way to pay for this called Flex, with tokens that you can buy, and they have a whole thing, how tokens work. You can buy tokens every 24 hours, and I was just like, this like hurts my soul to see a system like this. And like the idea that Blender is just go install it, like I don't know, there's a difference of entire paradigm there, I think. But I try to brush all of that aside quickly because it's not just, well, this is the free one. It's that Blender is cool on its own. So a lot of reasons for that. I would say if you're looking at the stack of workflows for 3D development, there are a lot of different things, and they're for different sorts of people. Like somebody might be modeling for architectural models. Somebody else might be sort of a character artist that is looking to do sculpture. Somebody else might be working in 3D print, trying to make very exacting things that are, you know, meant to actually like, you know, hold devices or like fit together or be glued together or whatever. Like all of these things are different skill sets. But I do think that Blender can do all of them. Maybe not the best tool for all of them, but that's the whole list there, I would say. And I think that that's great that it's all under one roof. There is such a thing as just sort of one skill set transferring to the other as you get familiar with it. Again, it's cross-platform, so like I have a Windows desktop and a Mac laptop, and the idea that I can like hop back and forth between working if I'm traveling with my laptop. Like right now, like it's really not a big deal. It does run well on anything. I'm not kidding about that like old computer in the closet. Like you can get something out of that with Blender. And then there's just a community around it that is like a very devoted, like kind of like deeply fanatical community. Like I'm definitely one of them. I'm wearing a Blender shirt today to try and like rep the home team. But yeah, that's the most money I've given Blender. That's not true. I actually do their like subscription thing just to like support it. But yeah. And then, so the community thing matters also because there are developers that extend Blender with cool tools. There are things that Blender doesn't sort of come with. I'll show a couple of these later. But the idea that there are just very talented people making tools that sort of fill out the things that Blender doesn't already do. They're professional quality tools. It's a thing that is always growing, I guess. I wanted to say too, I meant to say earlier, like I'm happy to do questions throughout the presentation. I'm gonna like try and leave some time at the end, but like if people want to like throw out a question, like please do. I'm happy to interrupt. Oh, I'm supposed to spare time for myself. I talked a lot, so. I got into 3D modeling trying to do game development. That's one of my happy places. I would say Blender is in a good spot to export to any of the major game engines that you're going to use. I've been using Unity forever. I'm not going to get into it. Unity's had a rough year. It's sort of, the crowd is in maybe a migratory place right now, and that's fine. I have liked all three of these engines that I've worked with in different ways. But the point is to say that Blender will give you models the same as anything else that you can feel confident will go into other tools if game development is maybe why you're here. So, we use it for game jams, student projects. I've worked in universities for years working with students, indie games, we've done film projects with it. The drawbacks, because of course there are some. Nothing is perfect except Blender, except in some ways. The learning curve is steep. I'm shamelessly reusing this slide from last year. This is Blender's learning curve. Blender basically doesn't care about the ways that other programs work. Like, the idea that Control-C is copy and Control-V is paste, like, not so much in Blender. The idea that, like, left-click is to select something was a controversy at one point in time. It was right-click for years, and I will tell you, there's some part of me that is still angry that it moved to left-click. Or that I have that muscle memory. This is all to say it's idiosyncratic, not to say it's bad. There are other tools that have these cool pipelines, like ZBrush and Maya have really neat integration. So if you're sculpting in ZBrush, you export to Maya. There are some very seamless workflows that aren't quite so seamless with Blender. But it is that jack of all trades where, like, with a little extra work and figuring out the Blender way to do it, the idea that you're still covered and can still do what you need to do. That's not the reason I'm going to go start spending $1,800 a year for Maya. And then lastly, there are tools that are very specialized. So if you are doing 3D print work and you're doing very exacting thresholds for things, you probably want a CAD program. You probably want Fusion 360 or whatever your favorite is. And Blender can maybe get you there functionally, but maybe that's not what you want to do. Before we just start showing stuff, just the basics of like what you need, what you want. I would say if there's one thing and only one thing that you need for Blender, I really would find the time to use it where you have a mouse. I've tried it with a trackpad and my wrist hurts. It's awkward. Any computer, truly your favorite potato is fine. It can eat hard drive space as things get big. That's going to be true of pretty much any creative media these days. What you will probably do, I think Blender is really very happy to use a full keyboard. If you're working on a laptop, I get around, oh no, it's happening again. I had presentation problems last year. Is that back?
It's back?
Yeah. There we go. All right, we're back. You can get around not having a full-size keyboard with funky things like this. This is my 12-button mouse. This is my Blender mouse. I pretty much use it everywhere. Having an external numpad, or just mapping other things to be what numpads do in Blender. It's just one of those things I mentioned. Probably need a big enough monitor if you're working on a laptop. You can plug into another monitor. You probably actually want a reasonable graphics card or processor, because it can get intensive. And then I think of all the things Blender does, and it does do this, graphics editing is maybe not its strong suit. So if you're doing graphic design type work, I will often go out to Adobe products, and I will groan about that. Lastly, the nice to have here, if you're doing things like sculpture or painting in Blender, maybe a graphics tablet. That doesn't mean you need like a $2,000 Wacom tablet. Those are great. But I bought off of eBay a little $30 old Intuos thing that works awesome. I carry it and it weighs about nothing. So you can do cool graphics tablets without breaking your budget. If you're getting into hardcore like sculpting or rendering or whatever, you probably want something like a gaming PC. And then time. This is the big one. It is a patience game. There's a learning curve. Like it's climbing as we speak. All right, last thing, other software that it pairs with. There are other tools, I don't really mean to get into them at all, but like if you're getting into doing materials work, like I want this to look like shiny metal, I want this to look like, you know, chipped wood or something. There are tools like Substance Painter that are all about doing that. I use these. ZBrush is the one that's all about sculpture, but I still use Blender for sculpture. And then hard surface things that might be where, so hard surface, like I'm modeling like mechanical elements or like, you know, things that are very rigid. Like there are workflows that are better or worse. That might be where you want something like a CAD thing. There's a cool tool called Plasticity that's hitting the scene in the last year or so that I really like, kind of in between Blender and CAD. And then I said the Adobe stuff like Photoshop, Illustrator, or, you know, GIMP and Inkscape. And yeah.
Greg, your slides are...
It just went off.
Yeah.
Oh. All right, nobody breathe. All right, so MAGFest. We're all there. I assume everyone knows MAGFest. So this is not a panel about MAGFest teamwork. That sure does sound like something that someone would say when they're about to show you stuff about MAGFest teamwork. So, that has been my role largely for this last year, and Blender has been what I've used for, I'm going to say all of it, and just call that accurate enough. Things like, okay, so Metroid Prime is the game that we're all sort of trying to put on the screen, on the walls everywhere this year. It was a 3D game, and that's the aesthetic by nature. It's the first, you know, 3D Metroid, and that whole 3D aesthetic was part of the thing. So when it comes time to like make the logo, that logo is a Blender file. It's a 3D thing. That's what it looks like if you tilt the camera a little bit. So as we all see that 1,000 times this weekend, that's what Blender did. I'm leaving the slide blank because this slide is the image. The template that you see here, the little ups and downs, the sort of heads-up display, like the visor from Metroid Prime. That's a Blender model that's rendered. You can get into cool stuff, like, one of the things I really liked was like taking apart, like, okay, well how do they do this for Metroid Prime? So you have to make things that look similar. So you like wrap these things around the camera like that and have this like sort of visor that's just a model sitting right in front of the camera, and you end up getting rendered displays like what's there on the right. Like things like that are what make a lot of the visuals that you'll see this weekend. Again, this is all Blender models. The map was actually 3D this year. Metroid Prime has this iconic 3D sort of low polygon wireframe map, so we did the event map the same way. It animates all of that. MAGTV has like sort of the animated ones already. It's been a lot of fun to make those. And then the crazy one for me this year was, so I don't do 3D print work really ever. I love it, but it's just not something I've had experience with. Except this year we had some models of the ship. So this is the Swag. If nobody's ever heard of Swag before, it is basically a custom circuit board project. Every year, a team of actual sorcerers makes this, and every year it has custom games, custom maps, all of this stuff, and they're available for sale. They're incredible. I don't do any of that app development, but last year people had the stroke of genius to make like a shell that wraps around it like a protective case, and they were like, hey, you have a 3D model of a ship. Like, can we make this shell look like a spaceship? So we did, and I ended up modeling this, and fun thing I learned is that really, like, there are very low thresholds for how much detail can 3D print well. So they were like, yeah, this is never going to print, and they're like, unless we injection mold it. And so Eric and Emily Anthony from the Swag team like put together this just incredible plan to turn this into an injection molded thing. It's awesome. It's for sale. I love it dearly. All of that again. This kind of thing. And then the last thing is, I was even using this to we made an art book this year. It's a player's guide about one of the games on the Swag, and I was like mocking up what the book would look like in Blender and try and pitch this idea of like, hey, we should do this. So, maybe not the most usual reason to use a 3D modeling thing, but it was one of the things we did. And if that was a shameless plug, I don't know. But yeah, so go buy that. Last thing I'll mention here is just the project that brought me into MAGFest in the first place. We have out in the promo area by the escalators our VR MAGLord. It is a VRChat live interactive portal. We basically take this whole venue and make it look like a MAGFest top to bottom. This year it looks like Metroid Prime, and you can basically go hang out with people that are in VRChat and be on both sides of the portal. Giant mushroom people are in there dancing, and you and the physical side get to go talk to them. That's right out there. It'll be running all weekend. That was supposed to be playing at that video, but this is what it looks like this year, so pretend it's Metroid Prime. The gazebo is made out of the combination of the Metroid Prime save point and the elevators. We have little holographic trees and some of this stuff. Again, 100% like so, MAGLord 4 is what we're calling it. Yeah, it is fun. So, look at the actual fun. So, to Blender. So we're just going to actually show Blender stuff here because it seems like people are interested in learning Blender. So, default Blender scene here. Actually, I'll pause real quick. Questions? Any questions, comments? Not at all. Okay. Yeah.
If Blender's free, how does it make money? Because it has to host like a website, I assume.
Yeah. So. Yeah, Blender is a nonprofit, and it is they have what's called the Blender Foundation, and it actually receives, I am a monthly donor to it because they give you cool things, like they make a film every year that's just meant to sort of show you, here's what making a film in Blender looks like, and if you're one of these monthly donors, you get access to all of those assets. You can like take it apart and be like, oh, that was a cool way to do that, or whatever. A lot of people donate that way, and that funds, I think they have a staff of like 20 people, but they also have a huge community of people that just work for free and do stuff. They also have corporate donations that they basically are very transparent about how they use. So famously, like the Blender Foundation received like a $1 million plus thing from Epic a couple of years ago, which was like seen as a vote of confidence that like, okay, this is becoming more of an actual industry tool. Not to say it's there, but to say that like, it's not quite the quirky idea that it used to be to try to get a job in game development saying like, okay, I work in Blender. Like that's becoming more of a thing. And like, it's probably outside of the scope of having like 45 minutes here, but like there are tools coming along in Blender that I think are actually really unique to Blender. And just to sort of like mention them, in the last couple of years, a workflow called geometry nodes has come along, which is basically like, it's like writing programming in 3D modeling where you can basically set up a kind of tool chain where like, if I want this to happen and then when it does this, go do this and this and this. I actually wish I had an example of it, but like, it's very unique to Blender, and there are other tools that are similar, but like, it's kind of like carving out its own niche. So I think that the idea that that's validating it in the context of why to use it in like game development or wherever else is becoming more of a thing. But all of that is just to say that like, there are ways that it receives money that I think don't scare me in the ways that sometimes, you know, the financial motivations of other things do. But yeah. So, all right, to Blender. This is Blender, and I want to show the default scene for a very important reason, which is that this is our friend, the default cube. It's a controversial friend. Some people think that there's no reason that an empty scene should have a cube. Those people are wrong. This is our friend, the default cube. You might need the default cube as you start modeling. It might just be there to like make you feel like it's not just Blender's not working, like there's something there. But if you start working and you need a default cube, the workflow is very simple. You just delete the cube, and then you go and you add a cube. So now you can start working. That's what you will do 100% of the time that you work with Blender. To the point that it has become quite a meme. But yeah. So the other couple of people, this is the Blender gang. This is default cube. So we know about the default cube. We'll go ahead and delete him. Wow. I can't defeat the default cube. It's resisting me. I'm not even kidding. I'm genuinely not kidding. All right.
grown too powerful.
It's grown too powerful. All right. The other one here is Suzanne. Suzanne is our monkey mesh. There are a few like primitive meshes that you get. You might want to start modeling. This is actually my mouse failing. Is what's happening. Of course, it fixed now. All right. Let me use my trackpad. Make sure it's. Or I'll just restart this thing. I swear Blender is so reliable until I talk about how reliable it is. I also don't work on a Mac, I'm just going to admit that. I'm not saying you can't, but like, I don't. Okay, I don't know what's going on. Of course, this looks good, doesn't it? Alright, I can just start from scratch here. I do have a couple Blender scenes open that I think are probably a little preferable for this full machine. This is not much of a machine that I'm talking through. Alright, so, modeling basic, that's great. Okay, yeah, here we go. So, we've got our default cube here, we'll go ahead and delete that. Alright, so we're going to just do some operations that will require a cube, so we'll make a cube. Basically, Blender, very, very basics. There are two modes at all times. There is object mode. Think of that as you have like a table with objects on it. You want to arrange them. You're not changing the details of them. You're just sort of moving them around. Object mode is meant for models that are like finished. You can certainly go change them as often as you like. But the basic operations, you can grab it with G to move it all around. You can scale it with S, and you can rotate it with R. Do as much of that as you need. That's all normal stuff. For editing things, like I want this cube to be different. You can come into what's called edit mode. That's up here, or the tab key. And this is the mode in which now you want to be doing things to your model, making changes to it. So I want I want to extrude and make new details here and make some kind of crazy architectural thing. If I was clever, I'd be making like the MAGFest square wave here, so let's do that real quick. Not that I do that a lot for MAGFest team. But yeah, so here's our MAGFest square wave. It's obviously very geometrical. We'll delete that cube as we're so fond of doing. You can do other things, like if I wanted to round these off, you can bevel these, or make it nice and round. We'll do that. And I'll tell you what, we'll turn this into one of the ghosts from Pac-Man here, because we're basically halfway there. So I'll come down here and add a few loop cuts, so I can actually cut in and make new geometry here, move these around. So if I were to basically take every other one of these and move these up, Pac-Man goes, yay! And I'll grab these and move these down, and actual Pac-Man goes. This is the idea of just basically edit mode is where I can actually make changes to the thing. That's all just kind of very, very straightforward stuff there. I was showing you the mascots for a reason. This is Suzanne, who is actually behaving this time, although just out of spite. He shamed me one too many times. Suzanne is nice because among the other primitive meshes, a plane, a cube, a circle, like these are the basic shapes that you might start because that's the nearest shape to what you're trying to model. Suzanne is there to give you something kind of complicated, like I want to see details, I want light to interact with it, all of those things. And the other mascot, who's not really a mascot, is this quirky fellow. This is the 3D cursor, another super useful, maybe controversial figure, because I think a lot of 3D things don't work that way. But the idea is just, I can put this wherever in the world and do things with it. So like, if I wanted to scale Suzanne, I would scale Suzanne by just scaling Suzanne. But if I want to scale it by the 3D cursor, I can put the 3D cursor over here, and now it scales relative to where that thing is. This is surprisingly confusing when you're first getting started, but like it actually makes a lot of sense, and you really do make best friends with this little red and white fellow here. And it's just one of those things to mention if you're starting the Blender journey. Okay. So next, let us go into some workflows here that I thought I'd show. So, work smarter, not harder, and all of that stuff. Let's use Suzanne gets into modifiers. So modifiers are a set of tools that Blender is basically all about using that are just like, make your life easier because these things will automate things for you as you go. Mirror is maybe like the star of that show in a lot of ways. So if I came in here and I was like, okay, Suzanne's great and all, but like, I want to make, I don't know, her eyes smaller, and I want her to have an earring. So I'll come in here and tell you what, it's MAGFest, we're going to do a donut earring. So I'll add a torus here. That's a donut, right? Yeah. Let's make it a little. Okay, there's a donut. But like, I did that on one side, and I don't want to do that again. That was hard. Obviously, that's a great. That's not a contrived example of anything. But, so I'm going to actually just come in here and just chop off the whole left side of Suzanne. We'll try not to maybe phrase it like that, because that sounds just a little more gruesome than I intended. But a mirror modifier there would actually keep one side of your model in sync with the other. You will use this constantly. The idea of modeling things that are symmetrical, I would say it's one of those things where, let's say you're modeling a character, odds are 80% of that character at least are symmetrical, and maybe details that start to be asymmetrical, and you just start to do that after you've gotten to that point. So, I don't know why.
So if you're removing the modifier, does the other half go away, or stay?
Yeah. So if I were to get rid of this modifier over here, you can see the stack here in the mirror. If I deleted that, it would be gone. But instead of that, if I wanted to come over here and apply that, now it's there as if it was always there, and I can use it. There are even cooler ways to work with it. Like, you don't need to mirror something exactly in half. You can use your 3D cursor and say mirror it on the other side of that, or whatever. It gets really useful. I'll show a maybe more practical example here.
Sorry, question.
Yeah.
You didn't delete the left side of the face.
Yeah.
And you still perform the mirror. Would the left side be underneath it?
It would, yeah. So, great question. If I mirror this, it's not going to look like much because basically it's an exact duplicate of it, but it would start to do weird things because, like, it's there twice, and, like, I don't really know how to make that. I mean, I guess, like, the fact that I can delete this vertex up here, but you still see a model under it, that's because you're seeing the other half of this one. For that, there are actually a lot of options with these modifiers that maybe are too much to go into, but there's a mode here called bisect that basically says, like, chop it in half for me. I didn't actually need to delete the half of it, but it's easier to sort of make sense with that. Bisect is doing that work for you. It's just enforcing which side of that you want. You can do this flip if keep the left side instead of the right side or whatever. Just lots of little like things that you can play with to get it to do just what you're trying to do. This is part of why it's cool that this has grown for 30 years and is like community driven, because basically what informs how that thing works is enough people being annoyed on the internet being like, hey, can you add a thing that chops this in half for me? I'm sure somewhere along the line Bisect got added because, hey, wouldn't that be nice? They were very good about listening to feedback. You know, I've been using the tool for years, and I would say they're sympathetic to their audience. So, all right, we're talking about mirror as if it's just X. It's not. We want to model a table, so we're gonna model a simple table here. A table is, oh, because I was supposed to delete it. Whoops, yeah, delete the default cube. Sorry, I'm forgetting my own jokes here. Alright, we deleted the default cube. See, that's why the default cube is there, though, because I really did need a cube. So we'll bring our top up here, and then, you know, we'll add a cube even. And that cube is going to be our leg, and we'll come in here, and here, let's select that guy, and take our leg, and scale it. We want to, as we do operations, you can tell it like to lock to a particular axis. So I could scale it and say, no, just do X by hitting X, or just do Y. In this case, we're going to do the opposite. If I hit Shift Z, I'm scaling it except along Z. So I want it to move along X and Y, but not Z. I want it to stay how tall it is. Z is up in Blender. There are different coordinate systems. Blender uses Z up. So okay, we've got our one table leg. We're going to put it over here. We'll combine it with that other mesh that we had. So now we've got the beginnings of a table. We've got this thing up here. That's great. Look at our table, except that like I don't want to do that 4 times. So I'm going to do the same thing I said before, and you know, what is that? Actually, all right. So there's that. I'm going to chop my table in half twice. Get rid of all of that. And you know what, let's get rid of this too. Because if I come in here and I mirror that along X, there's half a table. If I mirror it along Y, there's the other half. Like the idea that now I can come in here and be like, yay, like, in fact I want these legs to be even fancier, so I'm gonna take these three and start to give it like neat insets or whatever kind of stuff. Like all of this is happening in sync with one another here. So work one place, let it do all the other things for you. It could be that you just model one table leg and then let this thing set up your whole rest of your table for you. All of that is just to sort of show a modifier kind of workflow. The last example here I was going to say for that is, why not all three axes? Because we're going nuts here. We're living the Blender tree. There's a chance I got very little sleep this week, so bear with me, I guess. We don't know what this shape is. It's a weird shape, but let's symmetrically model, mirror it rather across all of the axes. So we're gonna mirror it along X. There we go. Mirror it along Y. And speaking of cubes that one shouldn't delete, if you haven't played Portal, you don't feel bad right now in the ways that you should. Something about deleting cubes, put that example in my head. A really practical one that I hope I can use a cheeky example of here is another modifier called array. If you look at the room that you're in versus the room that we have on the screen here, this is one of the very, very early models of what we had called the MAGLord, which is this sort of MAGFest version of the GayLord. You'll notice that the carpets are all sort of MAGFest logos, and my screen just went black. Did yours? You're good? Okay. We've got our little chairs, which are actually the reactor from Metroid. So we got that one for free this year. The idea here is like, okay, we had practical things to do. We needed to set up a room like this. This room is going to not be a perfect example of what I was trying to show. But like, you'll get the idea. So the idea of an array modifier is I have one thing, but I want to do it many times. Think of like I'm modeling a fence post, but I want to make it a whole fence. I don't want to model every single fence post. So we come in here and set up an array modifier. Well, now we have our two chairs. This mouse is throw you all over the screen. I'm sorry for anyone that I make motion sick. I'm aware that like 3D cameras can do that. But yeah, this is the idea is I could come up here and set this to 3 or 4 and have as many of these as I want. That seems maybe less than useful right now until you start to get into why we would do it. So instead of just telling it to offset based on its own length, we're going to give it some real world values here. So we're going to say I want this to offset along, let's say, 2 feet to the left. Wait. Wait a second, this up the way. Okay, so it's just not going to do anything. That's cool. Alright. Constant offset. There we go. So we're going to go back, like, I think these are about 2.5 feet apart. That's close enough. Maybe a little closer. And let's say that we have, I don't know, 10 of these. How about 6 of these, 8 of these? I don't know. That's great. We've got one row of chairs, but we don't just have one row of chairs in here. So you know what we do? Another array modifier. We're going for it. But we don't want it to be relative along the x. We want it to be along the y this time. So our second array modifier here, we're going to come down here and actually bump that forward or backward along y. So now we've got our second row of chairs. That's a little spacious. We've got to fit people into this room, so we'll go back a little bit. And now let's say we do that times, I don't know, 6 rows. But the thing is, we don't just have one row of chairs. I'm thinking of the panels rooms where they have this sort of like lane down the middle to come up to the microphone. So now, guess what? You called it a third array modifier. So we're going to come in here, it's modifiers on modifiers. But for this one, we're going to do X again, but we're going to take this entire island over here, and we're going to do that over again. And in fact, we could, we could do it, in fact, a third time and get 3 rows. But obviously, we've left these people here in an uncomfortable seating. This is one of those things they teach you when you're doing events is don't like phase people through walls. Don't
make people face the void.
That's fine. A certain kind of setting, you can maybe get away with it. But the point of this is now I can come in here and tweak these. So if I only had 7 chairs across, and if I only had, you know, let's say 18 feet between them or whatever, like I could actually configure a room like this with what are now just easy sliders for values or whatever. And I definitely didn't cheat and hide the right values below the floor here myself. I think you get the idea, and I won't make people watch getting that exactly right. There are just a couple more that I was going to go through, so I'm going to skip the maybe less. Well, I'll show you this one real fast. Suzanne. I mean, you know, it's Suzanne. In fact, I'll give you 2 for 1 here. I was going to show the subsurface modifier. Subsurf is basically just the idea that, like, this model is tremendously low polygon, but for a reason, which is that when you're doing detail work, often you want all of that sort of smooth surface to be the average of a very sparse amount of polygons. And the reason for that is that when I come in here and turn these on, suddenly Suzanne is very smooth. This is like, you know, maybe like in that kind of Pixar, you know, early 2000s kind of polygon vibe or whatever. And I can come in here and just by, you know, moving a few polygons at a time, get what are still sort of smooth. Year 2 of fighting the projector on record. But yeah, you can, you know, basically by modifying just a few polygons, you get a nice, very smooth version of changing these things. Where if this was all a million polygons, it would start to look jagged as you would move just a few of them around. The point of this file was not so much that as to say that lighting, if you're rendering things, you're going for a cinematic look or whatever. Well, we've set Suzanne here up with 2 spotlights, a harsh sort of down key light, a sort of nice fill light here underneath. We've got a cube here that does fog, just Blender can do these sorts of things. The point of all of this is when we go and into a rendered moody, Suzanne now in a sort of existential void Suzanne. Very achievable with just some dramatic lighting and a stupid dramatic camera angle. But yeah, this is all just basically, you know, fog plus harsh light. Just to say, you know, these are things you can play with if you're going for rendering, if you're doing film and not games. We are talking next real quick. I'm going to try and wrap up here for questions, but just to show maybe a couple of things about animation. We had a lot of things this year that were animated. These Metroid Prime sort of assets. We have our main character, Cho, from MAGFest this year, has the sort of classic Samus arm cannon, and as this model ever opens, you'll see it. There we go. And you know, the idea that it's fun as a model, but it's more fun when it animates. So we have these little idle sort of things where it can like pop open its missile doors or whatever. All of these are just done along what Blender calls bones. You can think of these as sort of the wire inside a claymation armature. Like, you know, you can bend the wire to move things into a pose or whatever. So, you know, as I would animate these individual bones, I can get things like the doors opening, or I can parent all 4 of these doors to one bone here that as I would rotate, all of them observe that thing's offset. That's very simple mechanical rigging, more fun one. Rigging is the term for basically setting a thing up to be animated. Sorry, I'm in rush mode here because I'm realizing I've gone long. But another fun one are monsters from this year, which you can shoot in our VR portal, so come shoot them. They need shooting. Okay, the material's broke because I'm not on my real machine, but it's not bright fuchsia in real life. But that's okay because this was just meant to show the animation anyway. You can set up cool sorts of animation things called inverse kinematics, which is a fancy way of saying make it a chain that follows from the end point backwards rather than like moving each bone. Like I don't want to just move this arm so that I can then move the forearm so that I can then move the wrist. That's a lot of work. You can get it to sort of automate for you. So I move just its contact with the... Alright. We can move just the end point and let it figure it out. So if I want our little spider boy here to walk along, it will sort of animate backwards to the point that I tell it to stop and animate the leg. And it starts to do wonky things as I get up to positions where it shouldn't bend like that. But that's why we give it bones like this called a control or like a reference bone, where I move this one up and that one's saying like, oh, okay, I get it. I'm trying to like average the distance between like here by way of here to get to here, and it will sort of figure it out and correct things. This is just all to sort of show you these are the things that Blender can do and the ways that Blender does it. I know there's not nearly enough time to actually like teach any of this year in this format, but yeah, that's kind of everything. I would love to take questions and talk with the last few minutes that we have. Yeah.
Are you able to edit the timing that those actions happen?
Yeah, for sure. That's you know, these look scary, and I don't mean to scare people with like how visually like noisy these kinds of graphs are, but basically these things, like if I just let this guy play out, he has these different animations. This is his idle. When he starts walking around, it gets a little noisier in here, and this is what that looks like as animation data. But really what you're seeing is like this blue bar here is just saying like the Z value of that thing. So like the up and down point of that leg is moving up and then down over time. And like that graph will show you just that. There will be a different line for its X. So if it's kind of moving to the side when it steps, you'd see that moving up or down. And then once you start to kind of like figure out how to read these, it stops being scary right away, and it's actually like a tremendous amount of control over it, and it starts to feel very like, I can do whatever I want with this. It's just that like kind of like, okay, I will never understand this because at a glance it's, you know, spaghetti, but I don't know. Yes is the answer, and that's basically how. The simpler version is down here in what they call the action editor, where basically you just put keyframes. So I say, at frame 1, be here. I move to frame 10 and say, now be here. It will figure it out and like interpolate for you. The graph tool there that you see above up here is more like, don't do it your way, do it the like very specific way I want you to do it. And yeah, that would be how.
Sounds good, I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about the pipeline for the MAGLord? Are you building the whole thing in Blender?
Yeah.
Like rooms and then assemble them and some other
Yeah, that's a great question. So the question is about the pipeline for building the VR MAGLord. Everybody's going to do it a little bit differently, I think, but the way I like to do it is do all of the modeling in Blender, except for objects that are going to be interactive. So like if we have like a chair or something, I'll model one chair and I will, you know, model entire rooms and then go and put many copies of that chair in on the game side. So the pipeline in terms of tools is Blender to model everything, and then that imports into the game engine Unity, and VRChat is basically a wrapper around Unity to sort of hook it up to all the VR stuff. So at the end of the day, VRChat is a Unity game that you just publish and Unity like hosts for you, or that VRChat hosts for you. So where the Blender ends and the Unity begins is somewhat up to you. You could do all of it in Blender and then just say import, and then Unity just kind of hit go. But you know, it's sometimes easier to do some of the fine-tuning in Unity because that's where you'll be like making the interactive elements like your scripts or your visual effects or whatever. Yeah.
Do you have any go-to online tutorial recommendations?
Yeah, actually, I had a couple of sort of outro slides here that I was going to jump back to, and I totally forgot. Oh, here's that meme, by the way. Please respect the default view. I would say this is my easy list, and I certainly have much deeper ones, but yeah. YouTube is the answer. There, you will never go wrong by just Googling your question and finding either a forum or typing this into YouTube and finding somebody that's done a deep dive video on each question. Pay a little bit of attention to how old the videos are because Blender changes all the time. Usually it doesn't mean that what you're going to see is not valid. It might mean that the way that it works is a little different, or like the interface might look different. But you know, keep to the last couple of years or so and it'll all be good. Blender Guru is one of those catch-all, really good tutorials about deep dive things. I like the channel Blender Secrets because they give you these really cool 1 minute, like I want to do one very specific thing, and that creator basically knows how to cut things down to just the content. And I really like that when I just have a very specific question. CD Cookie is a site I've subscribed to for years. They have YouTube stuff or they're a subscription service. I'm happy to pay them. They have really good stuff. if you're trying to get assets, like I want a material that looks like metal, I want a material that looks like wood, there's a site called Polyhaven that has a lot of free models, a lot of free materials. You can go really far with those and then figure out where the line is where I need my own custom stuff that I want to make. And often you can get a lot out of not needing to get into that yourself, but it's all free. And then I threw this one in here, like one of my favorite ways to learn is just to take other stuff apart. So there's a site called Models Resource that basically rips video game content and gives you like, here's the model of Samus from Metroid Prime. And like taking that apart and being like, okay, well here's how Nintendo made this model if I'm about to go make like my MAGFest version of our character. And like, you know, to some degree it's really helpful. To some degree they're doing things for such optimization that like I don't need to do it as well as they did. So I don't know, it's one of those like good points of reference. But yeah. I think I probably have to wrap here. 5 on, but we're good? Okay, a couple more questions. Yeah.
So when you're just starting out, you're in your workflow, like for example, maybe following photo viewers, say a still nut one.
Yeah.
What would you suggest you keep running into like different roadblocks when you don't know what those roadblocks are because you're following the tutorial, but it just decides, oh, I'm going to invert the complete opposite direction.
Yeah. I'm bad at following this advice myself, but I would say going to forums and just asking people. Like I've noticed that, like you know, like Reddit can be a really awful place for certain conversations. It's a really pretty okay one for like the Blender subreddit or like the 3D modeling subreddits. Like there will be people that just post a question like, "Hey, why did this do this?" and like. Very often that's the only place I'll interact with social media to like go in and answer questions like those because it's like a very low stakes kind of like, oh yeah, that happened to me, do this. Like, I would say, you know, there's always just to like start the tutorial over again because like there's just probably one little step, but I know how frustrating that gets when it's like time 3, so I don't mean to say like, you know, torture yourself exactly. Yeah.
What's the real-world scale within the Blender environment? Is it something you set up yourself, or
it can be by default? It's meter is the scale. So like when you would make default cube is 1 meter, and you know that's one of your points of reference. You can go in and set up any unit system that you want, though. So like when we do the VR MAGLord, we'll switch everything to imperial, and I'll set it to inches just because that's the easier point of reference for like doing scale work or whatever. It will change the grid for you so that the little fine-tuned grid is along inches, or if you zoom in, it's 1/4 inches, whatever.
Gotcha.
It's just per project, really.
All right, thank you.
Yeah. For what it's worth, if you're doing game dev stuff, Unity, I think Unreal treats meters as the sort of one unit. I don't think they even call them meters. I think they call it unit. The Blender default meter is equivalent to the Unity default unit. So that part you get for free, basically. Yeah. I think we're at time. So, yeah, are we good to wrap up there?
One simple question. One of the part you just recommend was using Adobe.
Oh, yeah. The question is about using Adobe? Yeah.
I just curious about following requirements.
Yeah.
Not requirements, but by the recommendations.
Right. Yeah. So the reason I mentioned the Adobe suite is just that, like, there will be times where you'll be working with like a material or something. So I have this thing that I want it to be made out of wood or made out of rope or something, and there are things that like I just want to go in and edit that thing to. Okay, we actually have 5 minutes left there. Thank you. Blender can do graphics editing. It can do image editing. It has a paint system and all of that. It's a little bit less like full featured than like something like Photoshop. So if I want to really do texture work or something, I might bite the bullet, load Photoshop, do the texture work there, and then re-import my image into Blender and just go from there. An equivalent would be that Substance Painter is a tool that's designed to do all of that. That's an Adobe tool now too. They bought MAGLord. I can't pronounce it. Yeah, it's an Adobe tool. Did that answer your question? Not at all necessary, no. And also, I would say, if you're already familiar with something like GIMP or other image editing tools, use whatever you like. It's just Blender is maybe more about painting than about like fine-tune like pixel work with marquees and things that you might want to do.
slide that listed the
Oh, yeah,
recommendations
sure.
for like materials and stuff?
Yeah, and you know, I would treat this as a very like my best guess of what to recommend more than anything sort of hard science here. But I would say, yeah, the what you would need, I would say, is just a mouse, you know, and hard drive space. But you probably want full keyboard, a monitor, you know, good enough specs in your computer that it'll keep up with you. Like if you're doing sculpture work or rendering work, or a lot of heavy animation where it's like a million things on the screen and visual effects and all of that, expect to have a gaming computer as the thing that you're going to do it on, because that's probably what it needs to keep up with it. But yeah, those external editors are more just about the convenience of like I really want to fine-tune, tweak this texture or something.
Right.
You might want just a graphics editor instead of like doing it the Blender way.
Okay.
And the nice to haves, I think, were yeah, that's sculpture work. So like, if you're doing sculpting work, you can do that with a mouse, but you know, it's pressure sensitive when you do it with a graphics tablet. You sort of get that feeling of very responsive, like I could just gently draw like a crease into this thing with like the tip of the pen, rather than my mouse like smashing it in because it's a big clunky circle of a selection tool, that kind of thing. Yeah.
You can show back to the concept thing.
The what?
Concept info.
My contact info, yeah. Sure. And
so when you're working from a reference, like what's the best way to go about implementing that in Blender? Blender have like a different work that?
Yeah. That was one of my maybe slides if I had time, and I'm glad to put that up here. Just for fun, this was a screen capture of like working off of the MAGLord. The question was basically when you're working from a reference, like what's the best workflow for using a reference material to then make a model? This is just some screen capture here that I'll let run for a minute of like taking a blueprint of the MAGLord and you know, trying to use this as the model. I'm basically treating that as a background layer and doing my modeling directly over top of that. You can
like pulling it up and building it off of it.
Yeah. So I'm drawing geometry with that image underneath of it as a reference to line things up. So yeah, we're out of time here, but I'm happy to hang out in the hallway for a minute and talk about